My neighbor Linda is 63 years old, retired, grows tomatoes in her front yard, and waves at me every single morning from her porch when I leave for work. She has lived next door to me for the entire 3 years I've been in this house. She is not someone I would describe as a dramatic person. She is the opposite of a dramatic person. She is the kind of person who brings you soup when you're sick and whose idea of a wild evening is a second glass of wine during Jeopardy. So when she knocked on my door on a Thursday evening looking like she hadn't slept in 2 days, I knew before she opened her mouth that whatever was coming was real. She said, "Joel, I need to tell you something, and I've been trying to figure out how for 2 weeks, and I can't keep it to myself anymore, and I'm so sorry." And then she told me, "My name is Joel. I'm 36. I work as a graphic designer, have my own small studio out of a spare bedroom in my house, mostly brand work and packaging for mid-sized companies, occasionally some editorial stuff when the right project comes along. It's the kind of job that sounds creative and interesting from the outside, and is mostly client emails and revision cycles on the inside. But I genuinely like it, and working from home in Spokane, Washington suits me in a way that I think I'd struggle to give up. I've been in my house on Rowan Avenue for 3 years. It's a 1940s Craftsman, small yard, detached garage I've been slowly converting into a proper studio space that's about 60% done and has been 60% done for 8 months. The neighborhood is the kind where people actually know each other's names, which is something I didn't realize I valued until I had it. Her name is Claire. She's 33, works in UX design for a tech company downtown, fully remote now, but goes into the office maybe twice a week for meetings. We met at a design conference in Seattle in early 2021. She was on a panel I was in the audience for, and she said something about user research that was actually interesting and not just conference speak, and I made a point of introducing myself afterward. We talked for an hour at the conference happy hour and exchanged numbers, and I texted her the next morning, which is also not something I usually do, but she was someone you followed up with. You could tell that about her immediately. We dated long distance for 4 months. She was in Spokane. I was about to move there. The timing was one of those things that felt like it meant something. I moved into the Rowan Avenue house in the fall of 2021, and she moved in with me about 8 months later, in the summer of 2022, which felt fast to some people and felt completely right to both of us. She brought her furniture, her plants, her very specific opinions about where things should go in a kitchen, and a cat named Ren who tolerated me on a good day and ignored me on a normal one. Life was good in the way that life is good when it's quiet and functional and you're building something together without making a huge production of it. Claire was sharp and funny and had strong opinions about everything, which I found attractive because I grew up in a house where no one had opinions about anything and the absence of friction had its own kind of suffocating quality. We argued sometimes, real arguments, not the passive-aggressive kind, and resolved them, which is a skill I didn't have before her, and that I'm aware I developed because of her, and that awareness is its own particular kind of loss now. She worked hard. Long days, late evenings sometimes, the kind of schedule that tech companies create when they can't figure out how to respect people's time. Her team was mostly remote, so she was on video calls constantly, and she'd sometimes take them in the spare room that used to be my studio before I moved my setup to the garage, and I'd hear the muffled sound of her talking through the wall. Normal. Just the texture of a shared life. My flaw, and Claire had pointed it out more than once, gently, then less gently, is that I'm bad at checking in. Not in a distant, checked-out way, but in the specific way of someone who gets absorbed in a project and surfaces 4 hours later and realizes he hasn't asked how anyone else's day was. I'd be in the garage working and she'd be in the house, and we could go an entire evening barely intersecting. And I thought that was fine because we were both comfortable with our own space. But she'd said more than once that comfortable wasn't the same as connected. I heard it. I improved, then let it slip, then improved again. The pattern repeated. It's one of those things you think you have time to fix. The first sign was in August. Claire had a colleague named Marcus who I'd heard about in the context of work for a long time. They'd been on the same team for almost 2 years, collaborated on projects. She talked about in the way you talk about someone whose professional judgment you respect. In August, she started mentioning him slightly more often and slightly differently. Not dramatically, just the way a name can shift in someone's vocabulary from background to foreground without any single sentence being the cause. Marcus had said something interesting in a meeting. Marcus had figured out a solution to a UX problem they'd been stuck on for weeks. Marcus was funny, apparently. She'd started describing him as funny, which was new. I noticed it and did nothing with it because there was nothing to do. Colleagues become more prominent in conversations sometimes. That's just how work goes. What I noticed around the same time was that she started going into the office more often. 2 days a week had been standard. In August, it crept to 3, then occasionally 4. She said the team was in crunch on a big product launch and needed more in-person collaboration. That's a real thing that happens in tech. I believed it. In September, I noticed she'd changed the passcode on her phone. She'd had the same one the entire time we'd lived together. I didn't use it often, but I knew it, the way you know your partner's PIN without thinking about it. One evening, I picked up her phone to check something while mine was charging across the room, and the old code didn't work. I tried it twice. I put the phone down and told myself I'd misremembered. I didn't ask her about it because I didn't want to be the person who interrogates his girlfriend about her phone passcode. There was one evening in September that sits in my memory with a specific clarity. She was on the back porch on her phone, standing near the railing, and she was laughing. The call ended and she came inside, and she was in a good mood for the rest of the evening, warm and engaged, the version of her that I loved most, the version that had been slightly intermittent for the past few months. I thought, she's happy tonight. I should make sure I'm showing up better, paying more attention. I cooked dinner, and we ate together, and it was a good evening, and I filed it under evidence that things were fine. I was measuring the wrong thing. October is when I stopped being able to keep the background noise at background volume. She was going into the office 4 days a week consistently now. A couple of evenings she'd been later than expected, dinner meetings with stakeholders, she said, product stuff, the kind of thing that happens at the end of a big launch cycle. I believed her because all of it was plausible and because I didn't have anything concrete, and because I was aware that paranoia is its own destructive force in a relationship, and I didn't want to become someone who acted on suspicion without evidence. What I was feeling was not quite paranoia. It was more like the sensation of standing in a room where the furniture has been moved slightly while you were out. Nothing missing. Nothing obviously wrong. Just the faint wrongness of dimensions that aren't quite what they were. I was designing a brand identity for a client in Portland, a week-long intensive project, the kind that takes over your brain. And I remember sitting in the garage at my desk one afternoon in mid-October, music on, completely absorbed in the work, doing what I do, and then surfacing and looking through the window at the back of the house and seeing the light on in the spare room where Claire took her calls. And I thought, I don't actually know what she's doing in there. I've been out here for 6 hours and I don't know what's been happening in my own house, and the thought caught me in a way it normally wouldn't have, because normally there'd be nothing to catch me. I went inside and made coffee and called through to the spare room that I was taking a break if she wanted to sit outside for a minute, and she said she was on a call, 5 more minutes. She came out 20 minutes later, phone in hand, slightly distracted. We sat on the back porch. She asked how the Portland project was going. I told her. She listened in the way she listens when she's half somewhere else. We went back inside. That evening I went looking for something I didn't want to find. I'm not proud of it. I went through the joint account we used for household expenses, looking at the last few months of transactions. Nothing there that told me anything useful. I looked at her car's location on our shared family map app. We'd set it up a year ago so I could see when she was heading home for dinner, and it was parked at the office where she'd said she was. I closed the app feeling like the worst version of myself. I almost convinced myself I was constructing a problem that wasn't there. Then in the last week of October, Linda's dog Pepper got loose, and I went next door to let her know, and Linda came to the door, and she looked at me with an expression that I couldn't read and said the dog had already come back. And then she said, "How are you, Joel? How are things?" in a tone that was doing something I didn't understand. I said, "Fine. Things were good. Thanks." She nodded in a specific way. I went home. I should have asked her what that nod meant. I didn't. The Thursday Linda knocked on my door, I'd been sitting at my desk, not working for about an hour. I'd been in a weird gray place all day. Not because of anything specific, just the accumulated weight of 2 months of small wrongnesses that I hadn't been able to name or put down. Claire was at the office. It was 6 in the evening. The Portland project was done, and I didn't have anything else pressing, and I was just sitting there in the garage staring at a blank artboard when I heard the knock at the front door. Linda was on the porch in her gardening jacket, the old green one she wears year-round, and she looked like she'd had a hard few days. I remember thinking she seemed tired, and I asked if she was okay, because that was the more obvious question, and she said no, not really. and then she asked if she could come in. We sat at the kitchen table, and she held a cup of tea I'd made her, and she told me what she'd been sitting on for 2 weeks. She'd been out walking Pepper on a Tuesday evening in mid-October, the same route she does every evening, down Rowan to the park and back. And on the way back, about a block from our houses, she'd seen Claire's car parked outside an apartment building on the corner of Rowan and Hartley. She recognized the car immediately, the blue Subaru, the sticker on the rear window that Claire had put there in the first month we were together. She'd thought nothing of it initially. Lots of reasons to be parked a block from home, maybe visiting someone. But then she'd seen Claire come out of the building's front entrance with a man, and they'd stood on the sidewalk together for a moment, and the quality of how they stood together told Linda, who has been alive for 63 years and knows what things look like, exactly what she was seeing. She said she'd stood there on the sidewalk with Pepper and she'd watched, and then she'd kept walking and she'd gone home, and she hadn't slept properly since. "I know it's not my business," she said. "I know. But I see you every morning and you wave at me and you're a good person, Joel, and I couldn't just—" She stopped. She looked down at her tea. I've been trying to figure out if I was sure enough to say something, and I kept coming back to the same answer. I was sure. I sat with what she'd told me for a moment. The apartment on Hartley, 1 block from our house. What did he look like? I said, and I don't know why that was the first question. She described him. Tall, dark hair, mid-30s. Which told me nothing, and also told me everything I wasn't ready to know. When was this? I said. October 15th. A Tuesday. I pulled up the Family Map app on my phone right there at the kitchen table. October 15th. I hadn't looked that day because I'd been in the Portland project. I looked now. The history showed her car had been at the office until 5:30, and then I followed the little line on the map. It had moved. Not home. To a point about a block away that resolved to the corner of Rowan and Hartley. She'd been 1 block away. I set the phone down. "Thank you for telling me," I said. My voice was doing something I didn't have full control over, but I was keeping it together because Linda was sitting at my table looking like this conversation was costing her something, and she'd done a hard thing, and she didn't deserve whatever I was about to become. She left about 10 minutes later. She squeezed my hand at the door and said she was sorry, and I said I knew and I meant it. I stood in the kitchen for a while. Then I sat on the back porch and I watched the light go gray, and I waited for Claire's car. She pulled into the driveway at 7:12. I was still on the back porch when she came through the house and found me there. She said, "Hey, how was your day? It was cold in the office today for some reason. Someone messed with the thermostat." She was setting her bag down, unwinding her scarf, the ordinary motions of coming home. "Sit down," I said. Something in my voice stopped her. She looked at me. She didn't sit. "I need you to tell me who Marcus is," I said. "The full version." What do you mean, the full?" "Claire." She sat down. Slowly. "He's a colleague. You know who he. Does he live on Hartley?" The silence was immediate and total. "October 15th, I said. "You were parked outside an apartment on Hartley for 2 hours. You told me you were at the office." "How do you—" She stopped. Started again. "Who told you?" "Does it matter?" "It was Joel. Can you let me?" "How long?" She looked at the table. "The porch boards. Anywhere that wasn't my face." "Since July." "July." "For months." The shift in how she said his name. The office days creeping up. The passcode change. The late evenings that I'd filed under crunch season and launch cycle, and all the other plausible explanations that I'd handed her without her having to ask. "Were you?" I stopped. I had to regroup the sentence. "Were you going to tell me?" I was trying to figure out. "Were you going to tell me?" "I don't know." Quiet. Just above a whisper. I want to note here that I did not yell. I'm noting it not because I want credit for it, but because I was surprised by myself. I felt something that had no name I could find, and it was very large and very close, but what came out was quiet. I don't know if that was control or shock, or just how I'm built. "Do you want to be with him?" I said. She pressed her fingers against her lips. She shook her head, but it was the kind of headshake that means I don't know rather than no. "Claire, I don't. I'm not." She stopped again. She had a habit, when she was stuck, of restarting sentences until she found the right entry point, and she couldn't find it. I didn't plan for this to happen. I want you to know that. It happened for 4 months. I know. 1 block away. She flinched at that. I know. I know how that sounds. I'm not sure you do. She started crying, and I sat there and watched her cry and felt something I wasn't expecting, which was a kind of distance. Like I was watching this scene from somewhere slightly outside it. Like the person sitting across from her was someone I recognized, but couldn't fully inhabit right now. I need you to go stay somewhere else tonight, I said. Joel, I'm not asking you to leave permanently. I'm asking for tonight. I need to. I can't be in this house with you right now. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded. She picked up her bag from where she'd dropped it, and she went into the bedroom, and I heard her moving around in there, opening drawers, and I sat on the back porch until I heard the front door close and her car start in the driveway. The cat, Wren, came out and sat next to me on the porch, which was more than she'd done unprompted in 3 years, and I thought, even the cat knows. I said I'd update, and I owe it to the people who were kind in the comments, so here I am. I went back and read everything over a couple of evenings this past week. Some of it helped. Some of it was people projecting their own situations onto mine in ways that weren't particularly useful, which is just what the internet does, and I hold no grudge about it. One person wrote simply, "Linda deserves so many tomatoes this year," and I laughed for the first time in about 10 days, so thank you for that. Here's what happened. Claire stayed at her friend Vanessa's for 11 days after that Thursday. Then, about 2 weeks ago, she came back and got the rest of her things. She's renting a place now. I don't know exactly where. I haven't asked. The cat went with her, which was the right call practically, and also its own specific small loss that I'm allowed to acknowledge. The house feels like a different space. Not empty exactly. I was alone here before she moved in, and I know what that feels like. And this is different from that. This is the presence of an absence, which is not the same as just absence. Her plants are still on the windowsill in the kitchen because she forgot them, and I've been watering them because I don't know what else to do with them. I've texted her twice about coming to get them, and she said she will and hasn't. So I water them. I told my closest friend, a guy named Pete who I've known since college, about 2 days after everything happened. Pete lives in Portland now, which is why I hadn't told him sooner. And he drove up that weekend without being asked, which is the Pete thing to do. He has a very specific skill of being present without filling all the space with talking, and we spent most of Saturday in the garage with the radio on working on the studio conversion that's been 60% done for 8 months, and it is now closer to 75% done, and that feels like the most useful thing I've done in weeks. My family knows in the general sense. I'm close with my sister Diane. She's 39 and lives in Boise, and she found out because I called her at 11 at night about a week in, and she picked up on the first ring because that's Diane, and she listened for an hour and then said all the right things and sent me a food delivery the next morning that included, inexplicably, a jar of expensive honey that I have been eating directly off a spoon and which has been oddly comforting. The mutual friends situation is what it always is. We had a group of people we spent time with, mostly other design-adjacent people, some of her work friends, some of mine. The ones who were primarily my people reached out. The ones who were more hers have been quiet, which I understand, and I'm not keeping score. The complication I didn't see coming is Marcus himself. I'd assumed, and I think this was reasonable, that Marcus was a single guy who'd gotten involved with someone in a relationship, which is a specific kind of problem, but at least a simple one. He is not single. He's been with his girlfriend, a woman named Rosa, for 4 years. Rosa works in the same company. She found out about Marcus and Claire about a week after I did, through a method I don't know the details of, and the fallout from that landed back at Claire through various channels in a way that meant there were suddenly HR implications at her workplace. I didn't cause any of that. I want to be clear about that because someone in the original comments suggested I should make it messy for them professionally, and I want to be equally clear that I did nothing of the kind and wouldn't. But the mess made itself, as messes tend to, and Claire is navigating a workplace situation that I have no insight into and have made a deliberate choice not to follow. Rosa reached out to me once, a brief message asking if I was okay. I responded that I was working on it and wished her the same. We haven't spoken since. She seems like someone going through a version of the same thing I'm going through, and I hope she comes out of it okay. The inside of it is the part that's hardest to put into coherent paragraphs, but I'll try. The first morning after Claire left, I woke up at 6:15 like I always do, and for about 4 seconds my brain was just running the normal boot sequence. What day is it? What do I have today? Is there coffee? And then the full weight of what was real landed on me, and those 4 seconds became the thing I most looked forward to each day because they were the only 4 seconds where I wasn't carrying it. That gap is longer now. I'm up to maybe 15, 20 seconds of ordinary morning before it arrives. Progress is incremental and unglamorous, which I knew in the abstract, but am now experiencing in the specific. I found a jacket of hers about a week in, a flannel shirt jacket thing she wore constantly around the house, the kind of garment that gets so worn in it becomes part of the furniture of a place. It was on the hook by the garage door where it had been for so long I'd stopped seeing it. I stood there with it in my hands for a while. I didn't throw it out. I folded it and put it on the shelf in the garage, and I told myself I'd deal with it later, which is the same logic I've been applying to the plants in the kitchen. I drive past the corner of Rowan and Hartley every time I leave the neighborhood. There's no route out that avoids it. I've started just looking straight ahead when I pass it, which isn't a solution but is a practice, and practices become habits if you do them enough. There's a podcast she got me into, one of those long-form interview shows about design and craft, that has new episodes on Thursdays. I noticed last Thursday that I almost texted her to say a new one was up. The reflex was fully formed before I caught it. I put the phone down and listened to the episode alone, and it was actually a good episode, which felt like a mean joke delivered by the universe with excellent timing. Linda brought me tomatoes from her fall crop last week. I ate them with salt on the porch and waved at her through the fence, and she waved back and neither of us said anything, and that was exactly the right amount of communication. Here's where I actually am. Claire and I have spoken twice since she got her things. Both conversations were practical, logistics, a joint subscription I'd forgotten to cancel, the question of whose name the streaming account is under, the small administrative work of dismantling a shared life. They were civil, careful. She apologized once, in the second conversation, and said she was sorry in the specific way that sounds like someone who has been thinking about how to say something and has finally found the version that fits. I said I heard her. I didn't say it was okay because it isn't. And I didn't say I forgave her because I'm not there yet, and I don't think it serves either of us to perform feelings I'm still working toward. I'm not interested in getting back together. That door closed in the moment Linda sat down at my kitchen table, and I think that's the right call and the honest one. What I'm still untangling is what to do with 3 years of real things that existed alongside whatever else was happening, because it wasn't all false, and I know it wasn't all false, and the brain doesn't know how to file that cleanly. I talked to a therapist for the first time in my life 2 weeks ago. My doctor had been suggesting it for a while for unrelated reasons, the isolated work-from-home thing, some low-level anxiety stuff, and it seemed like the moment to actually do it. The therapist's name is Dr. Patricia Ewan, and she has an office downtown, and she has a specific quality that I appreciate, which is that she doesn't tell me what I should be feeling. She just helps me look at what I am feeling. I'm going back next week. The garage studio is 75% done. I'd like it to be finished by end of year. It's a small target, but it's mine and I can hit it, and there's something in that feels necessary right now. Completing a thing I started, in a space that is fully and only mine. Linda waved at me this morning from her porch, same as always, and I waved back, and she went back to her coffee, and I went to my truck, and the neighborhood was doing what it does in the early morning, quiet and ordinary and entirely indifferent to what any of us are carrying. She knocked on my door because she thought I deserved to know the truth, and she was right, and it cost her something to do it, and I've thought about that a lot. The specific courage of walking up to someone's door with information they didn't ask for because you've decided they deserve it. And I think that kind of courage is rarer than it should be, and I hope I'd do the same thing if the positions were reversed. I don't know what this year becomes from here. I know I'm going to keep designing things and walking Rowan Avenue and watering someone else's plants in my kitchen window until she comes to get them, and looking straight ahead when I pass the corner of Hartley, and eventually, not yet, but eventually, the looking straight ahead will stop being an effort and just become the way I go down the road. 3 years of a life together. And the person who told me the truth was the woman next door who grows tomatoes and watches Jeopardy. And I will never take Linda for granted again for as long as I live on this street. Tomorrow, a man finds a box of old photographs in his basement while helping his parents move, and one photo makes him question everything he's been told about his own childhood.